Hello there. On the afternoon of March the 1st, 2009, Miss Wu, a middle-aged woman, was driving back to her hometown with her 7-year-old grandson after finishing work in the city. They were traveling on a highway that passed through the hillside of Xinjiang village, where the Sichuan buffaloes were grazing. As they were driving from the foot of the hill, the child suddenly said he needed to urinate, so Miss Wu stopped the car to find a place for him. Since it was a highway that crossed the hillside, one side was a high hill and the other side was a gentle slope. Miss Wu took her grandson to the lower side where there were abundant trees and bushes to attend to his needs. While they were standing near the road barrier looking down the slope, Miss Wu noticed something red standing out against the ground and dry leaves. Upon closer inspection, she realized it looked like a person lying at an angle, legs bent up towards the neck and wrapped in a red cloth. The head was tilted downward towards the slope, while the legs were higher up, with one arm stretched above the head and the hand resting on long hair. This lying position was highly unusual, and she thought that it seemed like an accident had happened to that person. The highway was considerably higher than the slope below, with a distance of over 10 meters from the road barrier to the woman lying there. Due to the significant distance from the highway, Miss Wu felt uncertain. She even squinted her eyes several times to get a better look and hoped it was just a plastic mannequin. When the 7-year-old child saw his grandmother hesitating and looking fearful, he followed her gaze and told her that it seemed there was a woman sleeping down there right next to a few tree roots. Hearing the child's words, Miss Wu became terrified and quickly called the police. The police in Dazhou City, Sichuan province, received the report and immediately went to Xinjiang village, quickly sealing off the crime scene. They found the body of a young woman lying on the slope of the highway. This location was relatively secluded, despite the heavy traffic on the road above, as there were no houses or pathways below and hardly anyone passed by. There were no signs of a fierce struggle at the crime scene, although a heavy rain had occurred earlier, erasing some important traces on the ground. Only a footprint of a man and few footprints near the victim remained. About 60 centimeters away from the victim was a woman's synthetic leather jacket, relatively new and rolled up with a black color. There were tire marks on the dry leaves deeply pressed into the ground, clearly indicating that a vehicle had turned around and left the scene heading towards Dazhou City. Based on these findings, and the absence of the victim's shoes at the crime scene, the police determined that it was a dumping site rather than the place where the crime had been committed. The victim was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and long pants, but no coat, despite the lingering cold weather, while the coat was found discarded near the body. The victim was a young woman approximately 20 years old, about 1.6 meters tall, with long hair on the forehead showing a bruise from a collision. There was a piece of red fabric rolled up on her neck. This was a long piece of red fabric, not a scarf, as Miss Wu initially thought. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, indicating strangulation. These are the preliminary pieces of information that the police collected at the crime scene. Subsequently, the forensic report revealed that the female victim was approximately 22 to 25 years old, around 1.62 meters tall, and had a few minor bruises on her body. The victim had died about 38 hours before the discovery of the body, placing the exact time of death on the night of February 27th. The red fabric was still wrapped around the victim's neck when the body was discovered. The victim's face and lips were swollen, the tongue protruded. There was froth in the mouth. Both eyes were bloodshot and bleeding. There were multiple horizontal and evenly spaced marks on the neck, causing bruising across the skin. All these signs indicated that the victim had been strangled to death. Prior to death, the victim had engaged in consensual sexual intercourse and there were no signs of violent assault. Although there were some bruises on the body, if they were restraint marks, they would usually appear in locations such as the front thighs, shins, or wrists. However, the victim only had one bleeding wound on the forehead and one on the back of the neck. These marks were likely caused by the victim struggling and hitting something while being strangled by the assailant. At the forensic crime scene, a semen sample was collected for DNA testing, but when compared to the national database, no matches were found. This indicates that the DNA data of this man has not been entered into the national database. However, another issue is that certain substances found in regular condoms were also present in the victim's body, indicating that a condom was used during sexual intercourse. From the victim's fingernails, forensic doctors obtained skin fragments and blood for DNA testing, but the results belonged to another man. This result did not match the previous semen sample and was also not found in the national database. So is the DNA sample from the semen or the DNA sample from the man she resisted scratching the evidence of the perpetrator in this case? Or could this be a case of two murderers? Initially, the police checked the camera at the toll booth near the hill, but as it was a highway, the traffic of cars passing through here was high day and night. and there was only one camera. During the investigation, the police checked over 200 cars of the same type as the tire tracks left at the crime scene to narrow down the suspects. They also searched for other trace evidence at the crime scene, but found no information related to the victim's identity. It appears that the victim's wallet and phone were also taken. To determine the victim's identity as soon as possible, the police photographed all the evidence at the crime scene, such as clothing, shoes, and outer jackets, and released personal identifying characteristics for public notification. There are many details in this case that make it very complex and require extensive reasoning. Figuring out the most reasonable scenario for the situation the victim encountered is what is giving the investigators a headache in these cases. According to the experience of the investigating police, there is a famous saying, "Discard far, bury near." This means that if the murderer disposes of the body, they will choose a location in a remote and secluded place far from the perpetrator and the victim's residence, especially with few people passing by. Discarding the body quickly requires less effort, but after a short period of time, it can be easily discovered as there is no cover for the corpse. Therefore, it is necessary to find a location that is far away. If the body is discovered early, there will be no acquaintances to easily recognize the victim. Bury near means that the perpetrator will choose a location not too far away. Firstly, because digging a grave takes a lot of time and must ensure that it is not discovered. In addition, they need to be familiar with the location, knowing when people pass by and when they don't. Secondly, it is convenient to monitor the news about that area, such as any changes in construction or excavation. This is the experience drawn from the cases of investigators, and they believe that it is highly likely that the living area of the perpetrator is far from the area where the body was found, because this is a case of discarding the body with no other behavior to conceal the corpse. For cases of body disposal like this one, once the victim's identity is determined, it can be considered a successful case in solving half of the crime. After finding the victim's identity, the police will narrow down the social relationships and from there search for any conflicts that could lead to the motive for the murder. The search for the identity of the victim finally yielded results. A few days later, a middle-aged couple came to report that their daughter had been missing for several days. The physical characteristics and personal belongings matched those of the person found murdered in the search notice. They had no idea their daughter was missing until they read the notice and immediately called their son-in-law. Upon learning that their daughter had left the apartment they were staying in a few days ago, they hurriedly went to the police station to report and identify her. When the police showed the couple the crime scene photo, they found the victim's face appeared unfamiliar and frighteningly distorted, making them uncertain if it was their daughter. However, upon closely examining the identifying features, this woman burst into tears upon recognizing her daughter from a scar on the victim's arm. The victim was identified as Hali, a 25-year-old woman who was beautiful and youthful. She had been married for 2 years and was currently living with her husband. The couple questioned why Hali had been missing for several days without her husband reporting it to the police. Hali's biological parents came to report the case, while her husband was the first to discover her disappearance. His name was Wei Shu Huang, and the couple had no children. They had a strained relationship and frequently argued. Li had proposed divorce several times, but Huang disagreed. The main reason was that the condominium they owned was purchased jointly, but all the money spent on it belonged to Huang. If they divorced, they would have to divide the assets in half, so Huang was unwilling to agree and tried to maintain the relationship. It was evident that he had conflicts with the victim both emotionally and financially. Furthermore, he told the police that on the evening of the incident, the couple continued to argue about divorce and money. Frustrated, Huang made an appointment with a group of friends at another person's house, and the whole group drank alcohol throughout the night. He also mentioned that Hali had a complicated social circle, having many male friends, and even after marriage, she had cheated on her husband. He was well aware of her extramarital relationship with a man named Chen Yuan Tuen. Occasionally, Li would leave home for a few days to go out, so her disappearance did not surprise her husband, and he did not report it to the police for that reason. After investigating Huang's activities, the police confirmed that he had walked to a friend's house in a nearby apartment, and the video footage showed him entering and leaving the building until the next morning. This drinking group consisted of 4 people, and when the police interviewed them separately, all of their testimonies matched perfectly. That night, after playing cards, they stayed overnight, and the host went out to buy breakfast to invite everyone to eat together before leaving one by one. Therefore, the police temporarily removed Wei Shu Huang from the list of suspects due to a lack of direct evidence of his involvement in the crime. Instead, the police decided to investigate Chen Yuan Tuen, a 33-year-old man who had an extramarital relationship with Hali and was her former boyfriend. Although the two had broken up before they continued to communicate regularly after Li married her current husband. When the police went to Tuen's house to inquire, he claimed that he had not met Holly in the past week. Before the incident, Tuen had sent text messages to arrange a meeting with Lee, but they didn't meet. He said he was alone at home that evening, but there was no evidence of any criminal activity. During the interviews with some of Lee's friends, they revealed that she often borrowed money from each of them but often forgot to repay, causing annoyance to many people. Lee was also known to lie in order to borrow money and always benefited more in her relationships. However, these were only minor conflicts in social relationships, and the borrowing amounts were not significant enough to cause any prominent disputes with anyone. The police did not find any new leads during the investigation of the suspicious individuals. At this point, the police were considering who would benefit the most if Holly were to die, possibly her husband, due to the disputed value of the house. Therefore, they secretly conducted surveillance to collect DNA samples from Holly's husband and her lover. The DNA results revealed that the DNA samples from the victim's skin fragments and blood under her fingernails belonged to Weishu Huang, while the semen sample belonged to Chen Yuen Tuen. The police continued to investigate Huang once again, and this time they noticed that his hands had some scratches that had already dried up. When asked about the cause, he explained that he had argued with his wife that evening about her desire for a divorce and splitting the house. Weishu Huang made it clear to Holly that the money used to buy the house belonged to him and that there was still a debt remaining. Since he had purchased the house on his own and the two of them did not have any children together, he insisted that if she wanted a divorce, she would have to accept leaving. Holly became angry and attacked him, causing the injuries. After the intense argument, he left the house and went to his friend's place as mentioned before. However, he didn't have clear evidence of any external wrongdoing with multiple witnesses. At this point, the police checked Huang's mobile phone, communication history, and bank account. They discovered that a few days before Holly's death, he had frequent contact with a man through several phone calls and had transferred 50,000 yuan to that person. Currently, the police suspected that he had planned to hire someone to kill his wife in order to avoid the property dispute. Therefore, on that night, he intentionally argued with his wife and then left to drink with his friend to create an alibi for not being at home. When the police questioned Weishu Huang about this money, he stated that it was the amount he paid to settle a debt after borrowing money to buy the house. Every time he gathered enough money, he immediately transferred it to the creditor. Following that, the police verified that these two individuals indeed had a lending relationship, and Weishu Huang was gradually repaying the debt. Furthermore, the man in question was an elderly person with a disabled hand. Thus, after further investigation, Huang was eliminated from the list of suspects. Subsequently, another group of police officers went to Chen Yuen Tuen's house and informed him that they knew he had lied because they found his semen sample in the victim's body. At this point, Chen Yuen Tuen admitted that they had arranged to meet and had sexual relations at his house, after which Holly took a taxi and left. Since Holly was murdered, the police also began to suspect themselves. Due to the fear of being suspected, Tuen lied and claimed that he did not meet Holly on the night of the crime. The police examined Chen Yuen Tuen's car but found no bloodstains. The car type and tire tracks did not match those at the crime scene. Despite conducting investigations using various methods, the police could not identify any suspects based on the victim's social relationships. Therefore, they decided to focus on reinvestigating the locations where the perpetrator could have dumped the body based on the traces found on the victim's body. The police discovered that the victim had been assaulted before her death, but her clothes were not heavily torn, and she only had minor injuries on her neck. If a person had two wounds on opposite sides like that, it indicated that the assault may have occurred in a confined space such as a car. Moreover, the police remembered that the victim was only wearing a t-shirt and long pants, while a black fake leather jacket belonging to the victim was found at the crime scene. This indicated that the victim was not wearing a jacket when she died. The time of death was after 11 p.m. on February 27th. Although it was quite cold that evening, it would make sense if Lee was sitting in the car and took off her jacket. The tire tracks left at the crime scene clearly indicated that this car could be the crime scene, and Chen Yuen Tuen also mentioned that Holly took a taxi to leave after meeting him. Therefore, it was possible that Holly was killed in a taxi. Furthermore, the police discovered a piece of red fabric wrapped around the victim's neck, and this red fabric was not ordinary. Based on the investigation, this red fabric was usually used by professional boxers or athletes during training, and they would tie it around their hand while boxing. Based on this information, the police speculated that the suspect could be a taxi driver who enjoyed boxing and was a physically fit man. With these characteristics in mind, the police started searching for taxis that matched the vehicle type and the traces left at the crime scene, including both company-owned taxis and independent ones. The police quickly gathered information about the taxi driver's routes from the dispatchers through GPS on the night of February 27th. The investigators ruled out vehicles that did not have matching routes with the area where the murder victims were found. However, for individual taxi drivers without GPS tracking in their cars determining their routes for that night could only rely on their testimonies. The case reached a deadlock until a taxi driver named Bang Hai suddenly sold his car and opened a fruit shop right after the police took his statement. While it was not unusual for him to seek a better job, the timing was suspicious, coinciding with the police investigation. This caught the attention of the police. Bang Hai, a 35-year-old local taxi driver, was known to be an amateur boxer and often frequented gyms after work hours. Based on multiple pieces of evidence that matched the suspect's profile, the police secretly monitored Bang Hai and individuals connected to him. They discovered that the mobile phone of Bang Hai's mother-in-law was the same phone used by the victim Ha Li when she was alive. With this evidence, the police quickly identified Bang Hai as the murderer. He was physically fit and an amateur boxer. Therefore, the police carefully planned to apprehend him. After successfully surrounding him, the police obtained compelling evidence, and Bang Hai quickly confessed. He claimed that he had never met the victim before. On the evening of February 7th, while Bang Hai was driving through a neighborhood, Ha Li hailed his taxi and asked to be taken to Lianhua Lake. However, as they approached the destination, Li suddenly said she had no money and proposed paying with her body. Bang Hai agreed immediately, and they stopped at a nearby store for Li to purchase condoms. The surveillance camera at the store captured this image at 9:50. They then continued driving onto the highway to find a secluded spot and came across a road leading downhill. There were no houses or paved roads here, so there was no traffic. The two seemed to enjoy each other's company, but after finishing, Li demanded 2,000 yuan from Hai. Hai stated that he didn't have that amount of money to give her, but she threatened to accuse him of rape if he couldn't provide it. Bang Hai claimed that he had already provided the service for free, so he couldn't give her the money. Li immediately started shouting, and Hai, in a panic, covered her mouth with his hand. However, Li continued to struggle, creating a chaotic situation. Caught off guard, Bang Hai hastily grabbed a fabric strap from the glove compartment and strangled the victim, causing her to lose consciousness. During the struggle, the victim flailed and hit her head on the seat, resulting in injuries to her forehead and neck. When he realized that Li had died, Bang Hai pulled her body out of the car and threw it into a nearby field. He then saw Li's black jacket still on the back seat and threw it out before driving away. Life always presents unexpected and extraordinary situations like this, so we need to be more cautious. Solving a case that starts with finding the identity of the victim and establishing a connection between the perpetrator and the victim who had no prior acquaintance but were involved in a random conflict like this case is very challenging. However, in the end, the perpetrator was eventually discovered due to a detail that startled him. He had sold the car and changed his occupation, but he couldn't escape. Regarding the issue of Ha Li's safety and behavior on that evening, it cannot be stated with certainty because it is only the testimony of the perpetrator. Although it seems logical and reasonable, it still needs to be examined. However, one thing is certain: Ha Li was willing to get in the car with a stranger and offered to pay using her body instead of paying for the ride. These are reliable details, and Ha Li was not coerced because she had previously gotten out of the car to buy condoms at a store. If it were a dangerous situation, she could have sought help at that time, and moreover, medical professionals have determined it was consensual intercourse. This case shows that women are inherently vulnerable, so they should not travel alone with strangers and should avoid secluded places to ensure their safety. At noon on November 9th, 2018, the police in Yangtu District, Jiangxi City, Chongqing Province, received a phone call from a fisherman on the riverbank. The person had discovered a floating body on the surface of the Yangtu River. The police immediately arrived at the scene upon receiving the report. At this time, it was the end of the rainy season and transitioning into the first month of the dry season, so the water level was still high. In the section of the river where the body was found, the water had risen close to the edge of the road, and the body belonged to a middle-aged woman of short stature but proportional build. Currently, the victim's body is floating face up on the water. What is particularly notable is that the victim's shoulders to thighs are tightly bound with ropes, meaning the ropes were wrapped around the body to firmly press the hands against the thighs. The woman has dark hair and is not wearing any clothes. A crowd has gathered on the riverbank and there is much discussion. Therefore, the police have sealed off the area to facilitate investigation and search for evidence at the crime scene. When the police brought the body ashore, there was a horrifying discovery as the victim's body had been severely mutilated and appeared gruesome. There was a deep cut on the victim's head, multiple wounds on the arms indicating signs of resistance. The most shocking thing was that the abdomen to the buttocks had been cut into small pieces. The police conducted a search in the vicinity but did not find the severed flesh of the victim. To clarify the case, the first and highest priority for the police is to determine the identity of the deceased. However, there were no clothes or personal documents on the body, which made it difficult for the investigating authorities to identify the victim at the crime scene. During the preliminary examination of the victim's body, it was observed that the victim had smooth and uncalloused skin on the hands, indicating that she was not engaged in heavy physical labor. Additionally, the victim was wearing a gold necklace depicting a sitting Buddha on a lotus pedestal and gold earrings, indicating that she possessed at least moderate wealth. Strangely, the victim's belongings remained intact and were not stolen, leading the police to deduce that this was likely not a robbery. To determine the cause of the victim's death, the investigative authorities must rely on the results of the autopsy. The victim was estimated to be around 45 years old and approximately 1.42 meters tall. Based on the degree of decomposition of the body, the forensic doctors concluded that the victim had died and been submerged in water about a week prior. The face, torso, arms, and legs of the victim had multiple injuries with varying degrees of trauma, and most of these wounds appeared to have occurred while the victim was still alive. The forensic doctors concluded that the wounds on the victim's body could be divided into two time frames, those inflicted before and after death. The investigative authorities further classified the wounds into two types. The first type consisted of wounds caused by sharp objects such as a knife, while the second type consisted of wounds caused by blunt objects such as a stick or abrasions. It is noteworthy that the number and nature of the wounds on the victim's body posed difficulties even for experienced forensic doctors in determining the actual cause of death within a short period. After a day of careful examination, the forensic report concluded that the victim had died from 6 deep stab wounds in the abdominal area penetrating the abdominal artery. These stab wounds sequentially pierced through the small intestine, liver, and stomach. Additionally, there were other cutting wounds on the body, and the victim's abdomen and buttocks were cut after her death. These cutting wounds were relatively smooth and flat, indicating that the perpetrator's intention was either to dispose of the body or to vent their anger on the victim. Furthermore, there were 3 deep chop wounds in the middle of the victim's shin, but they were not severed. Each chop wound was approximately 2 centimeters deep into the shin bone, and these 3 wounds were relatively close to each other, about 0.5 centimeters apart. This suggests that the crime was committed in a very private or secluded space. Based on the jewelry found on the victim's body, the police speculated that the perpetrator may have had a romantic relationship with the victim. The initial crime scene could have been inside a house, but since the victim's identity was unknown, it was challenging to narrow down the search for the murderer. To determine the victim's identity, the authorities interviewed people in the area and investigated the location where the perpetrator disposed of the body, the time of disposal, and proposed hypotheses about the body's drift based on the river's flow. Special forces expanded the investigation radius to about 100 kilometers and sought assistance from other units to identify the victim from the national database. Finally, they found a fingerprint sample that closely matched the victim's fingerprints. This fingerprint belonged to a woman named Wu Maofin, 43 years old, who had a criminal record related to an assault case. To confirm the victim's identity, the police conducted a thorough comparison and ultimately confirmed that the deceased person was Wu Maofin. So what was the reason behind this woman's previous conviction? It turns out that Fien used to live with an elderly man in his 70s who financially supported her, sparking much discussion among the neighbors in the area. One day, while passing by a neighbor's gate, Fien overheard some unfavorable comments about herself from a group of neighbors gathered in front of the yard. Feeling angry, and with her hot-tempered nature, Fien engaged in an argument and chaos ensued between them. Both parties refused to back down, leading to a physical altercation. The other person was seriously injured and had to be hospitalized, while Wu Maofin was convicted of intentional bodily harm. This incident occurred about 3 years ago. After gathering basic information and identifying the victim, the police went to Fien's house to investigate her social relationships. During the investigation, they discovered that the woman had complex relationships. Currently, Fien was living with her mother and her brother Wu Yufeng. According to archived records, Fien's brother had contacted the police several times in recent years, and the reasons were related to incidents where she had assaulted people. Fien not only attacked outsiders, but also physically harmed family members. Although Wu Maofin was of short stature, measuring less than 1.5 meters, she had a fiery temper and often acted excessively when attacking others. It had been over a week since Fien's death, and no one had reported the incident to the police. This indicated that the relationships between the family members were highly strained, prompting the police to visit Wu Maofin's house to uncover the truth. At that moment, her brother was not present, and only her mother was sitting in the outer room. However, due to old age, her mother was both mute and deaf, making it impossible for the police to communicate with her. The investigators had no choice but to search for leads inside Wu Yufeng's house. When they arrived, they found the house in disarray with a makeshift tent and a pile of straw in the yard. This tent was where Fien stayed whenever she returned, as the house lacked a proper door and was covered only by a thick, dark brown cloth to block direct sunlight from entering the sleeping area. According to the police records, both Fien and Feng have had numerous conflicts and have been involved in several fights. In front of Wu Yufeng's house, there is a small road that is only 200 meters away from the Yangtu River. The police began to suspect Fien's older brother, and if there was any conflict during the fight that resulted in her death, it would be very convenient to dispose of the body just 200 meters away. Therefore, the police decided to interrogate Wu Yufeng directly to observe his attitude and gather more information about Fien's relationship. Facing the police interrogation, he appeared very calm and natural. He told the police that his younger sister had no close relationship with the family and would often disappear for weeks or even months without contacting the family. He knew nothing about her work and life, but Feng knew that Fien had a boyfriend named Tong Dat Liu, and the two had broken up and gotten back together many times. Although they had no intention of getting married, they often had conflicts and arguments. The most recent incident occurred when Fien returned to visit her mother and spoke to her using gestures to indicate that Tong Dat Liu had been abusive towards her. Wu Yufeng has a hot temper, so when he found out that his sister was being bullied, he became angry and continuously cursed. Liu, who was also angry, immediately dragged Fien away. Feng not only answered the investigators' questions fluently, but also honestly admitted that he and his sister often argued and fought without hesitation. In fact, this is contrary to the psychology of suspected murderers, because they often have to appear to have a good relationship with the victim or even show sympathy to conceal their criminal motives. However, in Feng's case, it was the opposite, which made the police think that if he were truly the killer, his mental state would not be stable. At this point, the police intentionally mentioned Feng's residence near the Yangtu River to gauge his reaction, but Feng did not avoid the issue and openly discussed it with the police. He even pointed out that this road was the shortest route and only 200 meters away from the Yangtu River, which is completely inconsistent with the typical mindset of a murderer. Therefore, although the police initially suspected him, they found no evidence, such as bloodstains or disturbance in Fien's tent or his house. As a result, they temporarily set aside their suspicions about Wu Yufeng. Subsequently, the police changed their focus and began investigating Tong Dat Liu, the boyfriend of Wu Maofien. Although Fien and Liu had been dating for many years, Feng had no contact information for Liu. He only knew that Liu often brought Fien home on a motorcycle when they visited their mother. However, he later remembered that Fien had borrowed his eldest daughter's phone to call Liu, so his phone number was still recorded in the log. When the police obtained Liu's phone number, they found his address in Sichuan. They used this phone number to gather further information about him, but when they found Tong Dat Liu, he stated that he and Wu Maofien had broken up. In late October, Fien returned to Chongqing without contacting him, and he had no information about her since then. The police investigated from street cameras and information from toll stations. They determined that Wu Maofien had purchased a train ticket to Leshan, Sichuan, in mid-October 2018. However, there were no records indicating that she had returned from Leshan to Chongqing. The police suspected whether the victim had been killed in Leshan because her body was found on the Yangtu River, and Leshan was the upper source of this river branch. It is possible that Wu Maofien was murdered in Sichuan, and then the perpetrator threw the body into the upper source of the river to let it flow downstream to Chongqing. Although Leshan is the source of the river, the waterway is hundreds of kilometers away. According to the report from forensic doctors, the victim's time of death was approximately 1 week ago. Whether it's the end of the rainy season or the beginning of the dry season, the water flow is still strong and large. However, in such a short period of time, the body cannot float from Leshan to Chongqing. It is very difficult for a corpse to be carried by the water back to its hometown, both in terms of physics and probability. According to the testimony of Tong Dat Liu, he brought Fien to Chongqing on October 30th. The police also checked surveillance videos on the highway from Leshan to Chongqing and found that Tong Dat Liu had ridden a motorcycle to Chongqing. The police collected clues from there and continued to investigate to find out what happened after Tong Dat Liu brought Wu Maofien to Chongqing. However, they discovered that after Tong Dat Liu brought Wu Maofien to Chongqing, he returned to Leshan on the same day and did not leave the area during the time of the incident. According to the telecommunications report, Wu Maofien's phone was still active until November 2nd, including messages and calls to her acquaintances, so Tong Dat Liu had no opportunity to commit the crime. Based on the above evidence, The police ruled out suspicion against Tong Liu. After ruling out Tong Liu as a suspect, the investigation reached a dead end. At this point, the police continued to investigate to find out who might have a complex relationship with the victim. According to the telecommunications report, there were many people who had close relationships with her. On the evening of November 1st, Wu Maofin's phone suddenly lost signal, and it was also discovered that the last image of her was captured by a surveillance camera in the area at 17:07 on November 1st, 2018. The police also discovered that two people were in frequent contact with Fian before she was murdered. One person was a woman named Qin Li, and the other was a man named Liang Ni. Initially, the police focused on investigating the man with the surname Liang, and through the investigation, they found that Liang Ni owned a local tea shop which Fian often visited to play chess. When the police began investigating Liang Ni, they found that he had a very simple life and frequently stayed at the tea shop. Since there were cameras in the shop, it was easy to determine that from the afternoon of November 1st to the afternoon of November 2nd, Liang Ni did not leave the shop. Therefore, Liang Ni had no opportunity to commit the crime, and the police excluded him from the list of suspects and turned their attention to the woman named Qin Li, a close friend of Fian. As mentioned earlier, the forensic report on the victim's leg wounds stated that there were 3 stab wounds that penetrated the bone, with each wound 0.5 centimeters apart. This clearly indicates that the perpetrator wanted to sever this part of the body but was not strong enough to do so, hence giving up. Therefore, the police suspected that the perpetrator could be a woman or a man with poor physical strength. Qin Li and Wu Maofin had previously rented a house together before Fian was murdered. Therefore, the police believed that if Qin Li was not the perpetrator, she would still play an important role in the investigation because she had a lot of contact with the victim. So the police went to the place where Qin Li and Fian rented the house together, but did not find Qin Li. It was then that the police discovered that Qin Li had moved out and left the house 3 days earlier. After successfully contacting Qin Li during the interrogation, she told the investigators what she knew. On the evening of November 1st, Wu Maofian left the house they rented together. Qin Li knew that Fian was going to the town of Baisha in West District and would not return until the next morning. She also tried to contact Fian several times but was unsuccessful. Based on the testimony of Qin Li and information gathered from other sources, the police have ruled out suspicions regarding Qin Li, but they have also obtained important leads. Fian had multiple complex relationships and numerous boyfriends, but her relationships with these individuals were highly unusual. Some relationships lasted a long time, while others only lasted a few months or even weeks before she left. Fian once borrowed Qin Li's phone to contact a man in Baisha town because her phone ran out of credit and she couldn't top it up. However, Qin Li didn't know who this man was. The police obtained the man's mobile phone number from Qin Li's phone, and after investigating, they discovered that the owner of the phone number was named Tu Yutian. The police initiated an investigation and found that Tu Yutian lived in Baisha town, Jiangxi district, which perfectly matched the information provided by Qin Li. At this point, there was a high suspicion surrounding Tu Yutian, and they believed that the case was about to be resolved. However, when the police saw Tian, they realized that he was paralyzed and lying in bed in a prolonged paralytic condition. He could only speak a few simple words and spoke very slowly. With such poor health and disability without any other external evidence, it was evident that Tian was innocent. Based on the information that the victim frequently communicated with another person who used his identity card to register that phone number, but no one knew who that person was, an older police officer had a familiar feeling when looking at the suspect's phone number but couldn't remember where it had appeared before. He decided to check this phone number in the records of the cases he was managing and discovered that it belonged to the father of a repeat offender who had been involved in illegal fishing and the poaching of protected animals. The mobile phone was registered by the offender's father during the trial, and when he visited relatives in prison, his name was Tu Ming Yang. The police decided to go to Tu Ming Yang's house to conduct a search and interrogation. When the police arrived at Yang's house, the first person they encountered in the yard was his mute son. This mute person continuously gestured with his hands and feet, as if trying to report something to the investigators, but because he didn't know sign language, it was difficult to understand what he was trying to convey. The investigators speculated that the mute person was attempting to express that Tu Ming Yang had killed someone in the bedroom and then transported the body to the river using a cart. As the police approached the house, they found the door locked, but the TV inside was still on, and despite the police calling for Yang several times, he didn't open the door. The police decided to break in and quickly apprehended Tu Ming Yang right on the spot while he was lying on the messy bed. The room was pitch dark and disorderly, prompting Yang's initial terrified reaction of shouting, "It's not me! It's not me!" When questioned further, he could only stutter that it wasn't him and that he didn't know anything else. The police decided to continue searching Tu Mingyang's house. In the kitchen area, where many kitchen utensils were hanging, they discovered some dark red marks on the wall. However, upon examination, it turned out to be paint marks rather than blood. When the police asked Yang why he was using a phone registered under the name Tu Yutian, he immediately trembled, sat down on the ground, and explained that there was a time when he accidentally found Tian's identification card while visiting his paralyzed cousin, who was Tu Yutian. As his cousin had no need for a phone, Tu Mingyang registered a different phone number for himself using his cousin's ID card as proof. When questioned about Wu Maofin, Yang revealed that they had a vague relationship primarily based on exchanging money for affection. Due to the difficulties in life and raising his deaf-mute son, Yang did not have the means to remarry after his wife passed away. Therefore, he and Fien had a relationship to fulfill their physical needs. When multiple individuals knocked on his door claiming to be the police, Yang panicked and believed it was related to his son's case, so he did not dare to open the door and stated that it was unrelated. When the police informed Yang that Fien was dead and her last known location was the town of Baisha, where he was residing, Yang confessed that Fien came there not only to meet him, but also another man named Su Yu Qian. Qian had a similar personal situation as Tu Mingyang and sought out Fien for transactions. Subsequently, the police quickly went to Su Yu Qian's house to investigate. Initially, they asked Qian if he knew about Fien's death, but he immediately denied it and claimed not to know anyone named Wu Maofin. On the table in his house, his mobile phone was still charging, and when the police checked it, they found Fien's phone number in Su Yu Qian's contact list. Furthermore, suspicious dark gunshot marks were found near the bed in his house, and the police discovered half of the victim Fien's fingerprint on the light switch panel. The test results confirmed that the bloodstains belonged to the victim Wu Maofin. With such clear evidence, Su Yu Qian confessed that he had killed Fien. According to Su Yu Qian's account, the incident occurred on the morning of November 1st, when Fien came to the town of Baisha and visited Tu Mingyang's house to conduct a transaction. Afterward, Fien went to Su Yu Qian's house, but the two had a dispute over the price. Previously, the price was 500 yuan, but this time Fien updated it to 600 yuan. In practice, when using any service, if there is a price adjustment, they must inform the customer either verbally or in writing. In this case, Fien completed the transaction before updating the price for the customer, which angered him. He remarked that at over 40 years old, Fien's appearance was not worth 600 yuan. Naturally, women tend to be sensitive when criticized about their appearance and age, especially when receiving negative comments from others. Fien, a hot-tempered woman, attacked Qian when he mentioned this issue. Subsequently, an argument ensued between the two. Qian became angry, pushed Fien off the bed onto the floor, and then used a knife to attack her until she died. Regarding the injuries such as skin tears on the victim's buttocks and abdomen, Qian explained that his initial intention was to dismember the body into smaller parts and throw them into the river to cover up the evidence. However, when he tried to cut the flesh, he couldn't separate the leg bones, and he didn't have any other tools to solve this problem. Therefore, he decided to keep Fien's body intact. When he calmed down, it was already 2 a.m., so he decided to throw Fien's body and her personal belongings into the Yangtu River. Since the body was still soft whenever he laid it down, Fien's hands would fall straight to the ground. Therefore, he used a stick placed behind her and tightly tied a rope around her hands, wrapping it around her body like a mummy. He then tied it to a car and drove away. On July 21, 2020, the Chongqing Intermediate People's Court pronounced a verdict on Su Yu Qian, charging him with intentional homicide and sentencing him to death with a 2-year waiting period before execution. From a life perspective, this story also teaches us a lesson to avoid troubles, which is that everything should always be clear, from emotional matters to financial transactions. Perhaps you've all heard the term psychological manipulation. This term refers to the excessive psychological influence on others by distorting messages to cause mental confusion and emotional abuse. These actions are often aimed at gaining power, control, and manipulating the victim. Psychological manipulation can occur in any relationship, such as between friends, in love, and even among family members. Today's case is one such instance, though hard to believe. It is true. On the morning of July 11, 2016, a 35-year-old man named Lu Ren from Lushui village reported his wife missing to the Chaodun Town Police in Shenzhou County, Hebei Province. His wife Wang Linlin, 27-year-old, had been missing for 3 days. In his report, Lu Ren detailed that around 9 p.m. on July 8, 2016, he came home from the construction site and found his wife gone. Her phone was off, and since both their bicycle and motorbike were still at home, he assumed she was visiting neighbors. However, by midnight, she had not returned, prompting him to search the village, but to no avail. Initially, he feared she had been kidnapped and awaited a ransom call, avoiding the police to protect her safety. But as days passed without any strange calls and her phone still unreachable, he took a day off work to report her disappearance to the police. The Chowdhuan Town Police promptly investigated their home. Lushui village, where the incident occurred, is equipped with over 30 surveillance cameras. The police hoped these cameras would help trace her movements or reveal what happened. Reviewing the footage, they saw her pass 2 cameras near the village entrance at 8:26 p.m. on July 8th. She appeared from the screen's edge, turned left, and walked unsteadily. The footage captured Lin Lin for 15 seconds in a white nightgown holding a large flashlight. She seemed calm, without urgency, not appearing forced out of her home. Despite the village having over 30 cameras, only 2 captured her, and the second video was brief and inconclusive, leading police to suspect she intentionally avoided camera-monitored paths. Wang Linlin, born in 1989, married Lu Ren in 2011. She was known for her beauty and tall, slender figure. Before getting married, she was often called the village beauty and had many admirers. Linlin worked for a construction company as an office employee, but the construction environment was mostly male, and she often interacted with her male colleagues. Initially, the police hypothesized that Linlin might have run away with another man. However, they found that she did not take any personal belongings, money, or identification on the day she disappeared. They then searched for her based on her identity information, but found no records of her purchasing plane or train tickets. Nor did they find any hotel or guest house registration information for her. Upon thoroughly reviewing the surveillance videos at the village exits, they found no footage of Linlin. No strangers or taxis entered or left the village that night either. Therefore, the police concluded that Wang Linlin was likely still in the village. Despite extensive searches by both the police and villagers, there was no trace of her. A woman suddenly vanishing without a trace, as if she had evaporated into thin air, caused strange and eerie rumors to spread throughout the village. To quell these rumors, and because the longer the case dragged on, the less likely Linlin would be found alive, the police expedited their investigation. While awaiting the telecommunication report on Linlin's phone, the police began interviewing and investigating her relationship with her husband. It was known that Linlin worked in a construction company and was the main breadwinner for the family. Her husband, Lu Ren, did not earn as much money as she did, leading the police to suspect potential financial conflicts that might have led to a crime. However, Lu Ren had a clear alibi. Linlin left the house at 8:26 p.m., but Ren did not return from the construction site until 9 p.m. Therefore, he was not in the village when she disappeared. His co-workers confirmed that he had stayed late at work on the night of July 8th, with the crew finishing their shift around 8:30 p.m., making it impossible for him to be involved in Linlin's disappearance. At this point, the telecommunication report revealed that on the night Linlin disappeared, she called the phone number 4 times, but no one answered. An unknown number called Linlin at 8:17 p.m., lasting 2 minutes and 4 seconds, which was the last call she answered. The police quickly traced the first phone number to Tan Quen, a 40-year-old man who lived alone and had a previous conviction for rape. After his release from prison, he lived in isolation, making him a convenient suspect. When interrogated, he stated that he did not meet Linlin on the night of July 8th. She called him 4 times because he knew she worked at the construction company and wanted to ask her to help him get a job there. Given his criminal record, Tan Quen feared he would have difficulty getting hired and sought Linlin's help as a fellow villager. That evening, he drank at a neighbor's house and left his phone at home, missing all of Linlin's calls. Drunk, he returned home to sleep and only learned of her disappearance the next morning. Since the area where Tan Quen drank with his neighbor and his house lacked surveillance cameras, and because it was near the village entrance where Linlin had headed that night, the police were particularly suspicious of Tan Quen. When the police questioned the neighbor who drank with Tan Quen, he confirmed that they had been drinking together around 7 p.m., but after a while he got drunk and fell asleep on his porch. He didn't know when Tan Quen left. Thus, Tan Quen's alibi was weak and he remained a potential suspect. The police hypothesized that when Linlin couldn't reach Tan Quen by phone, she might have walked to his house to talk about the job at the construction site. Seeing Linlin's beauty and being slightly drunk, Tan Quen might have had bad intentions leading to a crime. The police searched Tan Quen's house and found a freshly covered patch of soil in the yard which looked like it had been hastily filled. When they dug it up, they found only the body of a dog, Tan Quen's pet, which had died a few days earlier. There were no suspicious traces or evidence in the house. The police also found the job application Lin Lin had submitted to the construction company to verify Tan Quen's claim that he had sought her help. However, Tan Quen still had no solid alibi and remained under surveillance as a suspect. The police continued to investigate the second phone number that had called Lin Lin on the night she disappeared. This number was not registered under a real name. To identify the owner, the police requested the call history of this unknown number from the telecom company. The report revealed that the phone number belonged to Liu Xian, a 53-year-old man also from Lushui village. Upon reviewing the past communication history between Wang Linlin and Liu Xian, the police noticed that they communicated fairly often. Linlin, a 27-year-old woman, seemed quite close to Liu Xian, a man in his 50s. Their calls and messages mostly revolved around buying and selling construction materials like bricks, stones, and cement. Liu Xian worked in the construction industry, but due to his age, he only took on small projects in the area. Linlin and Liu Xian frequently communicated to discuss work and financial transactions as Liu Xian received commissions for materials purchased through Linlin. Digging deeper, the police discovered an important piece of information. Wang Linlin's husband's family had a long-standing relationship with Liu Xian. Liu Xian had introduced Lu Ren and Wang Linlin to each other. Linlin, known for her gentle nature and beauty, had graduated from university and had a good job. Despite many well-off suitors, she chose Lu Ren, who came from a poor family and was just a regular worker. After their marriage, Liu Xian asked Lu Ren's parents to pay him 3,000 yuan as a matchmaking fee, but they could only give him 1,100 yuan as a token of gratitude due to their financial difficulties. They had spent all their money on the dowry and the wedding, hoping Liu Xian would understand their situation as they had no more money left. Liu Xian severely scolded Lu Ren's father, saying that his family had introduced such a good daughter-in-law to them, yet they couldn't even pay 3,000 yuan. Xian frequently caused trouble for Ren's father, who initially tolerated it. However, when he could no longer endure it, the two men ended up fighting at a village wedding, needing many people to intervene. Although there was information about conflicts between the two families, this was primarily between Lu Ren's father and Liu Xian. It seemed illogical to think that a conflict with the father-in-law would lead to the murder of the daughter-in-law, especially since Linlin was generating income for Liu Xian by helping him earn commissions on construction materials. However, to ensure no detail was overlooked, the police decided to investigate Liu Xian regarding the call he made on the night of July 8th, just before Linlin disappeared. Liu Xian explained that he called Linlin to inquire about construction material prices for a customer. The police continued to investigate Liu Xian's phone records and discovered that on the night of Linlin's disappearance, he also called his son Liu Han. This call occurred shortly after his call to Linlin, followed by another call lasting over 20 minutes later that night. Why would he call his son so late at night for such a long time if there wasn't something urgent or important? When the police separately interrogated Liu Xian, Liu Han, and Liu Han's wife, all three were hesitant, and their answers were inconsistent. From these suspicions, the police intensified their interrogations and investigation pressure on the family. Eventually, Liu Han confessed to the crime, revealing that they had killed Wang Linlin and thrown her body into the family's toilet. Following Liu Han's confession, the police opened the pit and found Linlin's body. This pit was an ancient type of toilet in China used to store and collect manure for fertilizing fields, and dumping the body there was intended to mask the smell during decomposition to avoid suspicion. The forensic report indicated that Wang Linlin died from mechanical asphyxiation, meaning she was strangled. However, typically when a victim is strangled, there are few other injuries on the body, even if the victim resists. Unlike typical strangulation cases, Linlin's body was covered in bruises and injuries, with almost no part of her body left unscathed. There were large bruises, multiple bone fractures, and extensive internal injuries. The forensic report detailed numerous large bruises on her legs, arms, abdomen, back, and face. Linlin had a ruptured liver, severe spleen damage causing significant internal bleeding, 4 broken ribs, and a fractured leg. These injuries shocked the experienced forensic doctors, as they didn't resemble the marks of an attack intended to kill the victim immediately. It seemed that Wang Linlin had been tortured before her death. The murderers did not allow her to die easily. What deep-seated hatred led to such a brutal killing of Wang Linlin? According to the police and villagers, the relationship between the two families did not have any major conflicts except for the issue related to the matchmaking fee. During the ongoing separate interrogations of Liu Xian and Liu Han, the family revealed the reason for killing Wang Linlin and detailed the entire incident. The conflict between Lu Ren's father and Liu Xian, as everyone knew, stemmed from the matchmaking fee. However, in reality, Xian's wife, Song Yuru, had long harbored a grudge against Lu Ren's family, which originated from a different story. To explain this, we must first understand a bit about Song Yuru's background. She was born into a well-off family and had 3 older brothers. Being the only daughter and the youngest child, she was excessively pampered by her parents. Song Yuru dropped out of school on her own after completing her first year of junior high, and her family acquiesced to her decision. The lack of education combined with her parents' indulgence resulted in Yuru developing a stubborn and even domineering personality from a young age. As she grew older, Song Yuru became notorious in the village for her aggressive behavior and had been involved in several assaults on other girls in the village. Although she came from a wealthy family and had a decent appearance, no young man in the village dared to consider marrying her. Liu Xian was aware of her notorious temper before marrying her, but his family was extremely poor and he had almost no chance of finding a wife. With the mindset of better than nothing, Liu Xian agreed to marry her, hoping that he could mold her behavior over time. However, reality was far from his expectations. Not only did he fail to change her, but she ended up controlling him. Song Yuru's difficult, tyrannical nature did not diminish over time, instead it grew more severe. She became increasingly strict with everyone, especially the family members. The family had to follow her commands without question, even if they were deeply dissatisfied. Even decisions regarding the children's romantic relationships and marriages had to be approved by her. Later, when Liu Xian arranged the marriage between Lu Ren and Wang Linlin a few days after the match, Lu Ren's father visited Liu Xian's house to discuss the matchmaking fee further. However, he never imagined that his visit to the Lu family would contribute to a great disaster for his family. When Lu Ren's father walked into the house, he stumbled upon Song Yuru, furiously berating her daughter for having an illicit relationship before marriage, causing her fiancé to want to call off the engagement. Seeing the entire Liu family and the future in-laws sitting inside, Lu Ren's father realized he had unwittingly witnessed a private and unpleasant family matter. Feeling awkward, he quickly turned and left, but shortly after he departed, the fiancé's family also stood up and left. Within weeks, Liu Xian's daughter, overwhelmed by the shame and her mother's relentless scolding, left a suicide note and drank pesticide to end her life. Following her daughter's death, Song Yuru irrationally blamed Lu Ren's father for unintentionally witnessing their family's disgraceful incident, which she believed caused the in-laws to feel embarrassed and call off the engagement, leading her daughter to take such a drastic step. Song Yuru unjustly considered Lu Ren's father indirectly responsible for her daughter's death. Later, the two families became entangled in a dispute over the matchmaking fee. According to an unspoken village tradition, if a matchmaker successfully arranged a marriage, the groom's family was expected to give the matchmaker a gift of around 3,000 yuan. However, Lu Ren's family could only afford to give 1,100 yuan after the successful gammat. Song Yuru, still harboring a grudge over her daughter's death, felt as though a wound was being salted. Wang Linlin frequently communicated with her husband, leading her to suspect an affair between the two. She repeatedly accused Liu Xian, who swore there was no romantic involvement between him and Wang Linlin. One day, Song Yuru checked her husband's phone and discovered that Wang Linlin's family had borrowed 5,000 yuan from Liu Xian's commission earnings to build a house, promising to repay it later. This discovery enraged Song Yuru, who became convinced there was indeed something inappropriate between them. On July 8th, driven by jealousy and hatred that had reached a boiling point, she demanded that Liu Xian prove his innocence by killing Wang Linlin. That afternoon, Song Yuru visited her son Liu Han and poured out her grievances and hatred towards Lu Ren's family, including her suspicions of an affair between her husband and Wang Linlin. She expressed her desire to kill Wang Linlin. However, Wang Linlin, being only 27, was quick and strong, while Song Yuru and her husband were both over 50, making it difficult for them to overpower her. If Wang Linlin managed to escape, they would lose their chance forever. Thus, they enlisted Liu Han to help in their murderous plan. Faced with his mother's fury and the family's long-standing compliance with her authority, Liu Han reluctantly agreed, trembling with fear. At 8 p.m. that evening, Liu Xian called Liu Han to come over to execute their sinister plan. He then called Wang Linlin, telling her he urgently needed the 5,000 yuan she owed him. Wang Linlin explained that she currently didn't have the full amount but could pay back 3,000 yuan immediately and promised to send the remaining 2,000 yuan along with interest later. Hearing this, Liu Xian asked Wang Linlin to bring the money to his house. Trusting him due to their business relationship, she did not suspect anything. Wang Linlin arrived at Liu Xian's house with the 3,000 yuan, but as soon as she entered, the three of them overpowered her, tied her up, and gagged her to prevent her from calling for help. Song Yuru then personally tortured Wang Linlin for hours to vent her rage. The weapon used was a large iron rod causing severe injuries to Wang Linlin. Song Yuru also forced her husband to participate in the beating. After hours of torment when they were finally exhausted, Song Yuru ordered her son to strangle Wang Linlin to cover up their crime. The three then disposed of her body in the family's waste pit, believing the decomposition process would hide any evidence. At the time of the crime, Liu Han was 28 years old, and his wife had just given birth to a baby boy 2 months earlier. During interrogation, Liu Han expressed deep regret for killing Wang Linlin. He lamented that if he could turn back time, he would never have committed such a reckless act. Unfortunately, life is not a reversible hourglass that can be turned over to start anew. All three perpetrators in this heinous crime were sentenced to death for the brutal murder of Wang Linlin. It must be acknowledged that Liu Xian had indeed chosen a fiercely temperamental wife. She not only indirectly caused her daughter's death, but also led her entire family to ruin. This story highlights that Song Yuru was not only domineering and autocratic, but also extremely cruel and violent. She never acknowledged her own faults, always blaming others for her daughter's death. From beginning to end, she either did not recognize her own mistakes or refused to admit them, constantly seeking someone else to blame. This was partly due to her upbringing, having been excessively pampered and spoiled by her parents. Her husband and son became mere puppets, manipulated by her. Her tyranny did not stop at forcing her children to break off relationships or compelling her husband to confess to infidelity. It reached a new level when she coerced her entire family into a crazy murder plan, with neither of the two men daring to resist. This family became a sinister combination of a tyrannical woman and two weak-willed men, resulting in a murder that seemed absurd, yet was tragically real, driven primarily by Song Yuru's authoritarian and delusional nature. How do you feel about today's case? Leave a comment so we can discuss. And if you liked it, don't hesitate to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.